Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Hi, George.
Good Friday. Well, yeah. Good you know what I mean. Good Friday. Good Friday's next week, but you know.
I think so. Actually, we haven't talked about that. I'm assuming we're not going to do any broadcasting during those public holidays, but that's just my assumption.
I'm a deeply religious man, so.
And you?
I also take May Day off. I take May Day off because I'm a deeply Marxist man as well.
And you religiously adhere to taking days off, which ironically is something we're going to talk a bit about today. Yeah, getting another day off, taking another day off. Thanks for joining us today. We're all a little bit sort of end of 6 weeks malaise over us today, but we're good to go. We've got a lot of interesting conversations, including in fact let's show the lovely people one of the things we're doing today. We've touched base a few times in Ukraine with journalist Tom Much. Today, from a conversation I actually had last night, we're going to be touching base in Ukraine with a current and active politician in Ukraine, Ina Sovsun, and I actually caught up with Ina last night. She gave me 20 minutes of her time to talk about all sorts of interesting things that a lot of people haven't heard about before with Ukraine. And let me just, I put a 60-second clip on TikTok last night. I don't use TikTok a lot, so don't panic too much about following me, but if you want to, you can. And I asked her specifically if you could say something to Jacinda Ardern, what would you say to her? And this is what she had to say.
And I believe what I want her to say, woman to woman, in case she's listening, well, first of all, she's great. Second is just please remember that this is about the crime against one child is a crime against all children of the world. And what Russians are doing right now is just incomprehensible. They are monsters for what they're doing, like raping women, killing children. And I believe not a single country should allow for that to be happening anywhere in the world. And we as the whole world should resist that. So I'm just asking you to step in to an extent possible. I understand Ukraine is very distant from New Zealand, but I still believe that we are very similar as all human beings, well, except for Russians. Because we all want our children to be happy. We all want to spend times with our loved ones. And that is the same that we want here in Ukraine. Nothing different from what you want in New Zealand. And that is what we are fighting for. So we are just asking you to help us get to that goal sooner rather than later.
So that full conversation will be coming up in the second half of this hour. It was really interesting, actually. We talked about lots of really interesting things. And I guess because one of the things we're able to do here is have a bit more space with our conversations, is we didn't have to rush anything. We talked for 20 minutes rather than 5.5 minutes. I mean, Ina has been on other New Zealand media outlets where she talked for 4, 5, 6 minutes, and that was it. But when you're able to talk for 20 or 22 or whatever it is, 23 minutes, you're able to ask questions and kind of just flow a general conversation, be more conversational, and kind of flow into other areas that maybe aren't as important all the time, but are more real world. Like, so for example, how does Parliament even sit in Ukraine at the moment? Like, literally, what do they do? Are they all on Zoom? Do they do it secretly? Well, we talk about that. What about NATO? And there is a lot of call for NATO just to be supporting Ukraine at the moment, but Ukraine's not a NATO state. And it's appropriate to actually ask, well, why aren't you? What part of Ukraine had to play in this where you're not a part of NATO? Is it all to do with NATO keeping you out? Or so if you were a part of NATO, you'd have NATO support right now. How does that work? So yeah, it's an interesting conversation, and we spend a good amount of time catching up and chewing the fat, so to speak, which is what we like to do here.
Yeah. I mean, increasingly, we've had feedback from guests that's what they love about it, right? Like Marnie Lloyd from Victoria University, was telling us that when she speaks on a topic with the news, it's a 2-second, 5-second soundbite, and you cannot get the nuance of these conversations across, even for something as seemingly simple as International Criminal Court, or fizzy drinks, for example, which is something we might get to today. You need more than 5 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, because and I had a conversation with David Seymour yesterday for people who saw it, and it was really, I know I'm being naive in saying this, but I get frustrated with the headline 10-second grab. I mean, I do a podcast which we're actually going to feature on today's show at some part, because we're talking about Taiwan and the international attitude towards Taiwan. And I do a podcast as well, which is called the Department of Conversation. Show for people who don't know, there is a, so here's a, this is it looks quite similar actually, except green. And we talk for a lot longer. This is a clip from it, so it's not necessarily giving you everything you need to know, but we talk for an hour to an hour and a half, because it's sometimes the headlines really mess us around. And my actual reason for wanting to do that podcast was I can remember looking at TVNZ's website, the news site, One News. It would have been 7 or 8 years ago, and they showed an 8-second video clip alongside a story. It was 8 seconds. I remember it, and I kind of felt a little bit offended. I'm like, I get that our our attention spans are lesser than they used to do, but I can do more than 8 seconds. And that's what spurred me into the idea of wanting to do something where we talk for a bit longer and spend a bit more time on things. And that's kind of flowed on into this, because, we don't talk for an hour about topics here, but we do talk for 20 minutes, where other media news outlets talk for 3 to 5. So we're just able to flesh it out a little bit more. Now, speaking of, we're supposed to be going into a conversation around Taiwan right now, but our guest isn't quite here yet. So maybe we should just start by talking about sugary drinks, which is another conversation we were going to do today. So let's do that. And if our guest turns up, then they will now have to wait for a little bit until we get ready to talk to them. So, big announcement yesterday. Was it a big announcement? Well, it was an announcement yesterday that the government is going to outlaw, what's the correct word? Sugary drinks in primary schools. And yes, of course they should. And of course they are. Of course, we wonder why. Well, if you're wondering why, here's an example. I think the WHO says at the moment that the sugar intake per day should be about 5 teaspoons a day. It used to be 10, it dropped it to 5 teaspoons per day. And if you have a look at a typical drink, like right here is a can of Fanta is 10 teaspoons of sugar. If you go to the 600 ml Cokes, 16 teaspoons of sugar. So even a can of fizzy drink is giving a child twice as much sugar as they need from their daily allowance. I think the WHO officially says no sugar, no added sugar would be the ideal. But they're realistic that it isn't everything, and they say 5 teaspoons is what we should be considering. And then you think about a little body, less ability to filter and work through that sugar as compared to an adult. Maybe for a child it should be 3 teaspoons. I'm not sure. Let's say primary school child. And so a can's got 10 in it, a 600 ml's got 16 in it. It's of course appropriate that if schools aren't smart enough to go no sugary drinks, then legislation should be brought in to make that happen. Of course it should. Of course, what's happened though is that National has come out speaking against it. Here's a very quick comment by I think their deputy leader.
Do we want to see a system where there's rigid controls and rules from Wellington which will stop my kid having a Fanta at the school disco? I don't think so.
Okay, so there's the first reactionary comment. And let's say, to start off with, no one has suggested that we should be banning the sale of drinks from discos, or, for example, if the school had a school fair, that there wouldn't be soft drinks sold at the school fair, because that is the appropriate time to have a treat. It's not an everyday food. It's a treat food. School disco is the time. So, of course, the first thing that happens is the right comes out and they're saying, you know, government doesn't need to control this, government doesn't need to be involved in this, government should stay out of this because, you know, I want my child's teeth to rot. I've got the rights and freedoms to decide whether my children's teeth rot out or not. And it's just like, man, is this a trait of the right or not? Or is it a trait of the opposition? No matter what the government says, they say the opposite. George, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, the proposal, so it hasn't been passed or anything. It's going to be in consultation until June, so schools and other organisations can give their feedback on the proposed thing, which has sort of been spurred along by research from the University of Otago, among other places, into specifically primary school drinks. But yeah, definitely, I think that especially at that level, with young kids like that, that this is a policy that a government should be passing. Now, when it comes to is this a trait of opposition or the right? Well, I guess this is the reaction that we saw there from the deputy leader of the National Party. That is indicative of the right, because it's that old argument that the government can't look after my kid, I'll look after my kid, right? It's that sort of thing. Now, you know, I do feel like, I don't know, I feel like all sides of the aisle have increasingly become sort of, especially with the American context, become increasingly sort of concerned with either identity issues or culture war issues, or surface level issues. Now, this one is an actual piece of policy that they're arguing over. The deputy leader of the National Party has taken it out of context by mentioning a school disco, which again, you know, politicians are good at doing. You know, this one is about policy, and you know, the opposition party are opposing it as they do. But we do, I think, see other points where the opposition is more concerned with either identity or cultural war stuff rather than policy related stuff, which I guess brings us to the Matariki
but
story as well.
Just before we go on to there, I just wanted to pick up on something you said. You
Yeah.
do hear the right, and I'm going to say the right, I am lumping everyone together, and it's not going to be everyone, and it is often influenced heavily in our media by the right in America. But saying things like, you know, the government should stay out of my family, the government shouldn't be involved in parenting my kids, yada yada yada, at the same time while they're taking a tax credit for their kids. You know, so it feels that sometimes these arguments are very it's you know, we've talked about motivated cognition before. Stephen Lewandowski, a professor who I've had on my podcast, talking about they come up with the outcome and then they figure any way to get there. So the outcome is government bad, government stay out of my but I'm not a hypocrite for taking government money for my kids. They figure a different path to get to the same outcome, and that seems to be what's happening. And I do want to be at least fair by saying, is this an oppositional issue or a right-wing issue? Like, the right will scream, you know, no to cancel culture, no to identity politics, and then you'll have Trump talking about everyone should stop using this company because they don't like me, which is cancel culture. And the right, and they'll talk about, you know, and they'll bring up identity as identity politics as well, and that will be a part of what they're what they're going to do. And it seems self-serving and it seems hypocritical at times.
And another of my favorite examples is like the sort of libertarian Elon Musk fans that, you know, are fans of small government and that sort of thing, when Elon Musk's, you know, SpaceX ventures and that sort of area, and, you know, tunnels in Los Angeles and Las Vegas rely on millions and millions of dollars in government contracts.
Yeah.
Right. So, or, you know, David Seymour bashing the welfare lifestyle when, you know, another day of the week we're you know, bailing out corporations and so forth. So yeah, that's another sort of classic contradiction when it comes to.
And actually, this came up yesterday in my conversation with David Seymour, that and not to him because he had to go and catch a plane, unfortunately, but this and I'll call it a right-wing trope, but it's a conversation from the right a lot, that they say we want small government, right? Small government, and some will literally say smaller government is better government, and I'm like, I think the not to imply that they're not smart, because there's some very smart people, obviously, but the smarter conversation should be not bigger or smaller government; it should be better government. And if there's an area of government that needs to see an increase in size and numbers because it's underserved, then that part should be bigger. And if there's an area of government that is overinflated and could operate much better smaller, then that should be smaller. But it's that motivated cognition, getting to that end point of smaller government's better, no matter what happens. And that's not the smart conversation to be had. The smart conversation is better government. I want better government. That's why with my conversation with Mr. Seymour yesterday, I said, I want you to be better. I want all politicians to be better. And I was honest with them. I said, I'm likely never to vote for you, because that's not where my personal politics sits. But I still want you to be the best David Seymour, either opposition MP or, part of a coalition government that you can be, because you are responsible for, at some level, how the country runs. And I want you to be the best you can be at that, because that impacts me wherever you're sitting. Now, we're going to come back and we will pick up on the conversation.
Yeah, we'll pick up on that. Yeah.
Shortly, because we are going to welcome to the studio now one of our guests for today, Associate Professor Stephen Hoadley from the University of Auckland. Stephen, good morning to you, sir. Are you with us, Stephen?
Good morning, Pat. How do you do? Good to be aboard.
Very, very, very well. Thank you. Thank you so much
me?
for joining us today. We appreciate you jumping on board. Look, the reason we've got you here.
Glad to be here.
The reason we've got you here is international news coming out that Nancy Pelosi is, it's said that it's going to happen, is going to be visiting Taiwan in the first such trip for 25 years. Let me just read this out for people. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is scheduled to visit Taiwan, according to media reports, a landmark display of American support that triggered a diplomatic protest from Beijing. Pelosi will arrive in Taipei on Sunday following a visit to Japan, according to reports Thursday in both Taiwan and Japan, including by Fuji News Network, which cited people it did not identify. It would be the first visit by a U.S. House Speaker since Newt Gingrich traveled to Taiwan in 1997. Sorry, that's a serving U.S. House Speaker. And I really wanted to have a chat with someone who could bring some, could broaden this conversation, Stephen. So thank you for coming on board again, as to really why this is such a big deal from both, I guess, from the three parties involved, which is the U.S. Maybe it's four parties. Maybe it's the U.S., the world, Taiwan, and China. So the floor is yours, sir.
And New Zealand, I should add.
Yeah.
And New Zealand. Now, we have to go back a step, Pat. And when you say Taiwan, we're really talking about a sovereign state called the Republic of China. It happens to be sitting on the island of Taiwan because the Republic of China government lost the civil war with the People's Republic of China, retreated to Taiwan, set up a democracy, became prosperous, and now there are 23 million people there who do not want to become part of the People's Republic of China with all the authoritarianism and the constrictions and the poverty that country requires. So it is controversial in the sense that the United States has always supported Taiwan and the Republic of China because it is an alternative to the mainland government, which is communist, which is authoritarian, which is very constrictive, which is expansionistic, and has, within the limits of the One China policy, assisted Taiwan as in a kind of unofficial capacity as much as possible. Now, Nancy Pelosi is not the head of state.
Yeah.
She is going there in a less official capacity, and as have many U.S. officials in a capacity less than representing the sovereign United States. And this is permissible under the agreement made with the People's Republic of China that the United States would recognize Beijing as the one and only China, but that it would conduct affairs with Taiwan on an economic level, cultural level, diplomatic level, unofficial diplomatic level, sporting level, and a number of other levels. So Nancy Pelosi, although symbolically she's a very important figure, technically she is less than a sovereign representative of the United States.
Yeah. So what's the big deal then? I mean, like China has come out with some complaints yesterday and saying they didn't want to see it happen. Well, yesterday our time, and it's actually China who's bringing the attention to this, making it seem like it's a significant act. You seem to be saying because she's not, the president, basically, it's not as important. Why is China worried about it at all then?
Well, China's worried about every kind of contact the United States and New Zealand has with the Republic of China on Taiwan. The
Right.
United States regularly sells very sophisticated military equipment, combat aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, to name just two. And every time China objects, whenever a US official visits Taiwan, they object. Whenever the president of Taiwan visits the United States, they object. They regard Taiwan as a province of China, much like Russia regards Ukraine. They do not respect Taiwan's sovereignty or the will of the people expressed democratically in repeated elections. And therefore, any outside assistance to Taiwan or any attempt by Taiwan to join the World Health Organization, just to take one small example, is objected to by Beijing. Now, New Zealand does conduct informal relations with Taiwan. There is a Taiwan representative office in Auckland and also one in Wellington. There's a trade relationship. Taiwan people come here and invest in property. New Zealand has some small businesses in Taiwan, and there is a New Zealand office. It's called a trade and industry office. And Australia does exactly the same thing. In fact, they're both in the same building on different floors, and they work closely together. So there is a vibrant relationship, but Beijing looks at these relationships with other countries and Taiwan with suspicion, feeling that they're aimed to split Taiwan away from the mainland. Well, they're not wrong. It's already split. It's not splitting. It's just maintaining the current separation of the two governments, each going its own way across 100 miles of water between Taiwan and the mainland.
Mm-hmm.
So each side has its point of view. I think New Zealand government is quite firm that the current relationship will continue. It's a good relationship for all concerned, except Beijing. And Beijing is simply wrong.
I'm interested in the idea of, China to Taiwan is very similar, if not the same, Russia to Ukraine. Now, the President Biden has said he will stand by and defend Taiwan should there be an attack by China, but America will stay out of Ukraine for the moment because they're not a NATO country. Why the difference, do you think? Why would America be happy to jump into the fray, so to speak, to protect and help Taiwan? And I'm not saying they're not helping Ukraine, but certainly it would appear that they're more open to military intervention with Taiwan, but not with Ukraine directly. What do you have an opinion on that?
Well, look, that's a very good question, Pat, and I think your perception is one that's popularly shared by many people. But as an academic, could I just put a little bit of nuance into that?
Of course, please do.
The phrase in both cases being used now is strategic ambiguity. In other words, the United States is not going to specify exactly in figures what it will do because the circumstances are always fluid. They may change. The perceptions in Moscow and Beijing may be quite distorted. and that the best deterrence, and the whole purpose here is to deter, not to fight, but to deter. Fight if necessary, but deter is far preferable in both cases, to deter further aggression in Ukraine or aggression against Taiwan. So the United States does have a law. The law does oblige the US president to give assistance to Taiwan if it is attacked. Okay, what
Right.
is your definition of attack? What about a
Yeah.
cyber attack?
Yeah,
What
yeah.
about taking one of the little offshore islands away from Taiwan, which the Chinese could easily do? It wouldn't affect Taiwan proper, but it would certainly be a symbolic blow. What if there was overflights, which there already are, threatening, or some kind of potential blockade of Taiwan? What would constitute an attack? Well, the United States has been very careful not to define it, nor has Japan. Now, there's every expectation Japan would come in along the United States if it came to a major confrontation. The Japanese have a very close relationship with Taiwan. They colonized Taiwan, but strangely enough, the Taiwan people like the Japanese. They built infrastructure. They were relatively benign as colonists. And at the moment, one of Taiwan's closest friends and trade partners and mentors is Japan. So again, China has to look at this and say, look, what actually will we confront if we did an invasion, a proper invasion, like the
Yeah.
Nazis against Great Britain in 1940? What would the United States do? And would Japan join in? Would South Korea join in? Would Australia, New Zealand join in and help the United States to resist the Chinese, bringing, of course, World War III much more close? So these are the kinds of somewhat messy, somewhat ambiguous calculations that are taking place now.
Yeah, it feels to me, and maybe I'm missing something, but it feels to me that Nancy Pelosi put herself in a little position of a no-win situation. If she goes to Taipei, then she may cause an international situation with China, which may affect trade. It may do some things. If she stops and backs down, then potentially her opposing politicians in America will use that against her as showing weakness and deferring to an authoritarian state. I just wonder. I wonder if it will happen or not. I mean, I put my money on it probably won't, but I guess we'll see. Look, we're going to have to move on a sec, but I did want to ask you one other thing, and I'm going to bring in some video for this as well. And it's one of those questions that I'm always interested as to why there is so much sensitivity around Taiwan, and why in the political world politicians don't seem to be able to just say, this is what I think. And I'll give you an example. In my podcast world, I had James Shaw on, who in New Zealand is a left-wing politician, and I asked him bluntly about, Taiwan, China. Is Taiwan a independent state? Is it a country? How do you say it? How do the Greens say it? And this is what he had to say.
Well, we would say that everybody on Earth has the right to self-determination. So that's not really a question for me. It's really for the people of Taiwan to determine for themselves. I mean, I'm not kind of remotely qualified to put words into their mouths. So that would be the stance that we would take.
And I'll leave it there because we need to move on a little bit. But that went on for about 2 minutes of me trying to be polite, but saying, why won't you at least, answer the question? And it seems politically the world over that maybe it's a little bit like before Ukraine criticism of Russia. That seems to be more prevalent now. But also in Taiwan, politicians have to play a game where they are seen to not support one side or the other. And I'm just wondering why that is.
Probably to avoid being provocative. China is still our trade partner, our number one trade partner. There's no need to be like Australia and the United States, which have suffered economic sanctions from China. New Zealand has not suffered those economic sanctions. And some would say, well, maybe New Zealand is putting trade and economic benefit ahead of morality. Well, they would be half right. New Zealand government is responsible for maintaining standard of living. China is important to that standard of living. Would it be moral for New Zealand to take a purist stance and forego a very good trade partnership, and New Zealand become impoverished, relatively impoverished as a consequence? So these are the consequences that politicians have to take into account. You and I can be quite forthright. We can say China is wrong, Taiwan is right. We'll defend them to the death, but we don't have to pay. We don't have to make the decisions and pay the political cost. The politicians do. So I sympathize with James Shaw and Nancy Pelosi as well. They do what they can to do the right thing without provoking enormous costs and liabilities, like Biden doesn't want to provoke Russia into using nuclear weapons in Ukraine. And to the rest of us, more or less nuanced people, it looks like mealy-mouthed indecision, obfuscation, evasion, and so forth. Well, that's the nature of politics.
Yeah. We're going to leave it there for today. From the University of Auckland, Associate Professor Stephen Hoadley. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today. I really do appreciate your thoughts and views around this conversation, which I'm sure will be bigger next week, should Nancy end up going to Taiwan.
Yes, keep in touch, Pat. Good questions. I'm always happy to come on and say a few words.
Very good. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us today. Well, there you go. So, George, you want to? I mean, you went in that conversation. Do you want to you want to share any thoughts around that? Welcome to.
Well, yeah, I guess it's it's hard to. I guess what keeps coming up is that it's hard to draw equivalencies between all these conflicts, right? Because they all have their diplomatic nuances, and I think it was a good point at the end there that Stephen made about James Shaw and New Zealand's reliance on China and that sort of thing, right? There's just so many consequences or so many variables to sort of take into account when speaking on these matters. But yeah, to you and I, it looks like hypocrisy. To them, it's politics.
But it's kind of. I mean, I want to go back to the conversation around how the right has been talking and that, because it doesn't look like hypocrisy. It is hypocrisy. Now, people need to think about that and not think hypocrisy is bad, because it's a word that just defines taking a different position for two different reasons. It is hypocrisy because, I mean, we had the Prime Minister here not wanting to use the word war criminal for Russia, for Putin, but then our opposition leader just came out straight away and said it. So that could cause an international situation. We've got the President of the United States talking about war criminals. So sometimes they are prepared to, put their money, the opposite of put their money where their mouth is, whatever it is, put their virtues where their mouth is, even if there's going to be those downstream effects. And then other times, like this situation, we're not. So that is hypocritical. Now, don't hear that as that means they're bad people. I'm just saying it is literal hypocrisy that other times they won't because of trade, but sometimes they will and be like, fuck trade. We'll just say what we want to say. And I'm wondering what level this needs to get to before. And I honestly, I thought that James Shaw, being a left-wing politician and obviously very much, I think about the Greens and I think about things like Amnesty International, I think about human rights. And I thought that'd be the one group that would go, yeah, of course it's a country, but no, wouldn't. And that's just like, whoa, I found that really interesting, not to pick on James, but that is so ingrained within our politics right now that we need to basically look after the big stack bully, to bring back that poker term, that we're not even going to critique or criticize China's relationship with Taiwan. Now I don't know enough about it to even have an opinion on it, but I would think someone involved in the halls of power would. I mean, I was looking up polls before we came on that were saying like about a quarter of people want to stay with the status quo, about a quarter of the people want to become an independent state in Taiwan, and then the other 50% are undecided. So the people of Taiwan may not even have a clear understanding yet, which is, I guess, kind of what James Shaw was saying on some level. But yeah,
well, their day-to-day lives aren't necessarily affected by these things on the world stage, right? And unless it affects their material existence, then sometimes it's hard to get people to care about these sorts of things. It's a very old sort of frozen conflict, right? That has sort of just sort of stabilized, I guess, to a certain extent, and isn't as there isn't a chunk of Taiwan that's at war since 2014, for example, like in Ukraine.
And look, let's jump back to the conversation we had on before Stephen came on, which we were talking about the sugary drinks in schools, and we were talking about how in New Zealand, the right, now I'm going to say the right because the opposition is right at the moment, but maybe it's because their opposition coming out very strongly, sort of saying, don't be the fun police. Come on, do we really want the Wellington to be telling us what we're allowed to do with our kids in schools? And the answer is, well, if you're not a responsible parent, then yeah, because the other option is that you make terrible decisions. That line of thinking, if you extrapolate that comes into, I should be able to smack my kids, don't tell me what to do, like that all follows the same thing. So yeah, of course there needs to be a legislative line sometimes to enact laws that impact parenting and adulting of children. And I guess the question is, where is this line? And what National is saying is, not with my kids' sugary drinks. And what Labour is saying is sugary drinks.
It's sort of like, it's also making a stand in terms of social cohesion and the schools having a unified voice on sugary drinks. So it's that material effect of the students not drinking sugary drinks, but it's also, making a stand in terms of policy to say we as a collective do not want our kids drinking sugary drinks. If the parents want to give them drinks when they get home, they could have their tea party when they get home.
I also wonder about, I remember I had when I was a student, I worked at a petrol station in Beach Road in downtown Auckland, a Shell service station. And it was in the days where they used to use petrol vouchers and various bits and pieces, and you could buy petrol vouchers, but petrol vouchers were treated like cash, right? And because they were treated like cash, we weren't allowed to sell them on someone's credit card because we'd pay a 6% fee on their credit card, which means it'd be like giving out cash and then only getting 94% of that cash back. So what the boss there said is you have to add 6% on when selling them on credit cards. Now, obviously, if you come in as a customer and you want $100 worth of vouchers and someone says to you there's $106 on your Visa card, they're not going to be happy. And my boss said to me, look, just tell them that your boss is a cunt. And that's what he said. He's like, and so just play dumb and just go, look, I'm real sorry. I actually agree with you, customer. My boss is an utter cunt. And this is what he says. You can take your complaints up with him. Now, my boss told me to say that about him because he wanted to give me the out and safety in the store to not have that confrontation. I wonder how much of this is the same with the government and the schools. No longer do the schools have to debate with parents my right to send a fucking Fanta to school. They can just go, look, I agree with you, it's a bit over the top, but it's law. We can't really do anything about it. Can you please just not put us in a position where we're going to have to then be hauled over the coals because your kid wants a Fanta at 12:30 rather than 3:30 when they get home? I mean, I don't think that's a smart way to make legislation, but it is a potential benefit from it.
Yeah, I guess that is a knock-on effect. The other thing teachers must be stoked that they're not going to have kids fired up on sugar, right?
Let's also talk about the next thing we want to talk about today, which is to do with this, because in the first instance, you've got the right/opposition saying that they, that the left/government are being the fun police. Let my kid drink Fanta. But then in this instance, which I think most of us are incredibly excited about, you've got the right being the fun police, because they've come out basically saying no to a public holiday for workers, saying that we shouldn't be taking it. They're citing what it's going to cost the economy and what it's going to cost government. A couple of quotes here. Labour MP Kiritapu Allen has hit back at ACT and National, labelling their critique of the newly passed Matariki public holiday bill as ideological, which I don't know if that's a criticism, because having an ideology is not necessarily good or bad. But it goes on to say, National's Paul Smith said, while Matariki was important, quote unquote important, the government was playing Father Christmas, handing out holidays at the public's expense. Father Christmas. So in this instance, you've got National being the quote unquote fun police saying, no, you can't have a day off. Don't have a day off. It's too much to ask and it's too much for business to carry. And it just comes back to that: is this hypocritical, or are they approaching both of these? Well, actually, they're not, because the Phantom one's got nothing to do with finances. You could argue this is coming from a financial point of view, if you wanted to, but the other one's just, should we say, identity politics, really?
Yeah, the ideological line is weird, right? Is that basically when politicians say that they're using that negative colloquial term of ideology, like someone's not caring about the facts or something like that. That's how they're usually using it.
Or they're voting with their heart,
which is
rather than their head.
which is weird for this one, because my critique would be that National was being heartless and only cares about the finances, right? Only cares that workers keep working and don't have a holiday. They don't care about the symbolism of a holiday. They don't care about the spiritual importance of the holiday, right? They're being heartless secularists who want us to work till we die, without breaks, without holidays, like the Matariki holiday.
And it does continue this conversation we're having about the right, and I am being fair by saying the opposition, because if the left were in opposition at the moment, would they be doing the same thing for their own things? I'm not actually sure. Perhaps they would, but it's the right at the moment about kind of just being a contrarian opposition, whereas no matter what the government says, we'll say the opposite for whatever reason. And I don't think, again, when I talked to David Seymour yesterday about being a better politician, not about him, but all politicians being better, this is an example. It's like, so rather than saying, "Duh, sugary drinks, banning them, that's stupid," or saying, no, we can't afford a holiday, I want to know why. Why? Actually, I want to go one step deeper with all the politicians. If the right or the opposition at the moment thinks that there's a genuine and real reason why this is a bad thing, like you're saying, there is a financial versus a social kind of conversation to have here. If it was $100 billion versus 5 people having the day off, easy. If it, you know what I'm saying, there's going to be an offset somewhere to have this honest conversation. But it also seems to me, and this is just my perspective, that the right at the moment, maybe in general, they are better at finding the loophole to push their position through and their thoughts through when the equal and opposite gets ignored by them, when it would be equally as valid. So, for example, the "don't tell me how to parent my kids if I want to send sugary drinks to school" is also, if I want to smack my kids as a good parent I can, is also you could go to the nth degree going, "Don't tell my kid under 16 not to smoke cigarettes." If they want to smoke cigarettes and I'm okay with it, that's fine. That's obviously the nth degree. But I'm sure that the right is okay with those restrictions being put in place. But it's like this restriction, there's not. And I'll give you an example of the conversation we had yesterday with Mr. Seymour. Now, I had to wrap up a bit quickly because he had to go and catch a plane. But I got to a point in the conversation yesterday, and you can look it up on YouTube. I'm sure you'll be able to find it, or my Twitter feed, where Mr. Seymour, I said to Mr. Seymour, why are you so focused on the racial part of equality? And this wasn't his response to me, by the way. This was a response that he put out a couple of days ago. He goes, quote, "Your racist is, of course, the logical response to someone calling for racial equality." And what I was trying to explain to Mr. Seymour yesterday was, it's not that he's calling for racial equality. It's that he's only calling for racial equality. I mean, in the protected classes we have, and that's the classes you think of people that you can't discriminate against, whether it's age or disability or sexuality or sex or disability, those protected classes, race is one of them, ethnicity is one of them that you can't discriminate based on, right? Now, in all those other categories, we have discrimination all the time. And actually, in the conversation yesterday with Mr. Seymour, I got to say, why aren't you fighting against discrimination based on age? I mean, getting the pension at 65 is discrimination based on age. I can't get it. I'm discriminated against. Māori, who may not make it to 65, can't get it. So there's a discrimination there. And I said, what about, and I know this is a bit of a flippant example, and please don't hear this and have you think that I'm going, well, the disabled shouldn't have car parks. But having a special car park for someone who's disabled is discriminatory against non-disabled people. And his response was, there's good reason for that. And I'm like, well, yes, that's the point. Not that we should be calling for racial equality, is that we should be using discrimination in all protected classes when there's good reason. For example, if there is good reason amongst a race issue where my finger has to be put on the scale for a reason, let's say because the health outcomes for Māori are so much worse than non-Māori in the health system, then it's actually appropriate to use discrimination based on race in those issues. So the response to Mr. Seymour, who will never see this, as to you're racist is, of course, the logical response to calling for racial equality. The answer to your point is no, it's not. It's a response to only calling for racial equality and never calling for equality above all the other protected classes where discrimination happens. George?
Yeah, it's a teachable moment for him, possible. Although it wouldn't be, right? Because he's a racist, right? That seems to be sort of.
I don't know that. And I'm perfectly happy you saying that, but I don't know that.
That's sort of the conclusion that it seems to be coming back to, right? Where he says that there's a good reason for the disabled example, for example. But then when it comes to historical racist injustice, there seems to be some sort of weird sticking point.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I'm not 100% serious when I call him a racist, but it's interesting how that is always the one that he seems to get stuck on.
And the right in general gets stuck on. Have you ever heard a politician get up and talk about removing, like an example I used to him yesterday, a protected class is religious beliefs, yet the right en masse will defend the church's right not to hire its premises out to a gay couple.
Yeah.
So they're okay with that discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying is, and you know what, I'm not even talking about the particular example of what Mr. Seymour's talking about when it comes to racial equality. What I'm saying is, if we're happy to accept this is the conversation, right? This is the truthful and intelligent conversation. If we're happy to accept discrimination in other protected classes, then we should be happy to accept discrimination in the class of race. The conversation should be, what discrimination are we happy to accept? That should be the conversation, not that we shouldn't, because we accept it in other protected classes. So we should accept it in the class of race. What we should be saying is, where is the line for that? When is it okay and not okay? Not it's never okay. And that's the issue with David Seymour and those on the right. They say it's never okay. And I'm like, well, actually, if we accept it in other areas for good reason, if there is good reason to accept it under the protected class of race, then we should be okay with that as well. I think that's.
I mean, they're often not going to have these conversations, right? Because they depend on the boogeyman of separatist government or co-governance or whatever, however we want to call it. They depend on that as a way of communicating racial undertones. I mean, even the Labour Party has sort of depended on an undercurrent of racism in this country, right? Remember the example of the foreign house buyers in Auckland, right? They depend on a racist undercurrent among their Pākehā voters. Don Brash era National definitely had in the past, and I think that's exactly what they're getting at when they bring up these issues of co-governance.
Yeah. Now, look, we had a couple more things to think about then, but we were planning on having a short show today, and we've got an interview coming up now with a politician from Ukraine. So, George, are you going to hang around? Do you want to watch this, or are you going to shoot off? You can do either. Up to you, mate.
No, I'll be here at the end of the show.
All right. So, look, I have to tell people this is one of the things that will frustrate me most of all. And if you're watching, and if you're going to be watching, one of the things I will always want to do is hold people and politicians accountable for their inconsistent views. As I said, we think about the idea of we should all be equal in the law under the topic of race, and that sounds fine, but there are already lots of examples how we're not equal, and it's often the people who are not impacted by the positive discrimination are the ones that are saying that as well. So it's something that we'll have here. If it's something that annoys you, then you're either going to keep watching and be annoyed, or you're going to maybe experience something a bit different that other media outlets won't be doing, because that's what we're about. Right. So everyone knows what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. If you've been watching or staying tuned to this show, you'll understand that we have had communication into the Ukraine to a journalist. I managed to connect with an active politician, an MP, co-leader of the Holos Party, in a Sovsun, and she was gracious enough to give us about 15-20 minutes last night to talk about, from a political perspective, from her politician's eye, what she's seeing going on in Ukraine right now, and what they need to see happen and have done. So this is a conversation that I recorded last night. Don't freak out. I think I've got a different cap on and go, hey, you look different. It's because it's a pre-record. But it's an interesting interview. And the thing we love doing here is giving things more than 3 minutes between 2 ad breaks. So we go pretty deep on some different issues here, including at one stage, I sort of want to at least hold Ukrainian feet to the fire about NATO, because if Ukraine was a part of NATO, whatever part they played in not being a part of it, this would be a very different situation now. So is there some culpability there? Is there some responsibility there? I'm not saying there is or isn't, but that was a part of the questioning that we got to, and she answered really interestingly. So have a look at this interview. We'll be back in about 15 minutes to wrap up. And thank you to you guys for watching live. If you want to comment, feel free, and I will do my best to lay them over the screen as we're going. But here we go. Welcome to the show, Deputy Leader of the Holos Party in Ukraine, Ina Sovsun. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate some time.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
You are, as we speak, in the western part of Ukraine. I saw, I think, some commentary from you when you were in Kiev. How long have you been out of Kiev for?
3 days, I think. I left over the weekend. So I was leaving as the Ukrainian army was regaining control of Bucha.
Yeah.
So that is the time I left. I was thinking of probably I should stay, but I did promise my son to come visit him. So I tried to, in this uncertain times, I try to keep promises to my son. So I still came.
As a Ukrainian, can you explain to me what it's like? I'm thinking about, I did have a question written down here to ask you about, partners, fathers, husbands, sons, brothers, the men who have been told you must stay in Ukraine. How does it feel being a mother, having a son who, if called upon, will need to go and fight in these circumstances?
Well, my son is 9, and this is one of the things that I wanted to point out is that, yes, my son is small, but what I don't want this war to end with is some sort of compromise, which will lead us to yet another war in 5, 6, 10 years, because I don't want my son to inherit this war. That is for sure. And I was talking to my boyfriend, and he has his kids, and he said the same. And we had this, and my boyfriend is fighting in the army right now. So for him, that is particularly, important to make this statement. He's saying, I don't want my sons, he has 2 sons, to inherit this war. So this is how being a mother influences you. Of course, you worry so badly for your children, but even more, you want to ensure that they have the future where they don't have to worry every single day that Russia will attack yet again, and they will have to go to war. So that is how it affects my thinking. Like, I don't want my son to have this war in his future life.
So your son is young, 9. So he was away from you in Kiev for his safety, and you have gone to meet up with him now. That's what we're saying. I got you. Was your partner your boy? Sorry, you go.
His father took him to the Western Ukraine the very first day of war. That was the deal we had before the war, because there was much intelligence gathered that the war might start. So I talked to my ex-husband, the father of our son, and we made a deal that he will be the one who relocated our son. Given I'm a member of parliament, I had to stay. Typically, mothers would take children away, but in our situation, that was different. Sure. So he took him here to the Western Ukraine. Yeah, and this is the second time I can visit him for a couple of days.
Very good. So I'm interested how Parliament, how members of Parliament are operating right now. Is there an active government going on? Are MPs, are parliamentary members of Parliament meeting, or are you all separated and individualized because of the war?
We are actually functioning, and that is something that I couldn't imagine to be working, but it actually is. So we do gather for emergency sessions. They're different compared to what they used to be before. So before, those were lengthy sessions where we would debate on different pieces of legislation and, state political positions and so on and so forth. Right now, that has been done differently. So what is happening is we do have preliminary and informal negotiations about different pieces of legislation that need to be passed. But then we just gather just to, to press the buttons and to adopt the pieces of legislation that we have previously agreed upon. And that has been done mainly for security reasons, so that we all do not stay for too long in one single building.
Gotcha.
And location of the building is, of course, known. So, and Kyiv is under constant air raid alerts. So for safety reasons, we do not gather for too long. We do not announce the sessions taking place in advance. We are only allowed to publish any information about the sessions like 2-3 hours after it was over. So it has changed in a way that how it is conducted. But the very idea of passing legislation is still there. And I think those parliamentary sessions were particularly important for another reason as well, is that showing to the people and to the world that we are still here, we are not leaving, we are governing, the country is functioning, and we keep on fighting. And I will tell you this, after every single parliamentary session, we all are getting like hundreds of messages from people all over Ukraine, but also from the world, saying that we are so amazed that you are still here. Thank you for showing that you are still here, that you are fighting, that gives us strength to keep on fighting ourselves. So this political function of showing that we are we are standing is also important, probably even more important than actually passing certain pieces of legislation.
Yeah, right. Is the Ukrainian government speaking with one voice at the moment? I mean, ultimately in politics, we have people on the left and people on the right and people who have disagreements on how to do things. Are there any disagreements at the moment, or is everyone united in the approach that Ukraine is taking towards what's happening?
I will tell you this, we are completely united on issues that have to do with resistance towards Russian aggression. Like literally, it's a single voice policy, not because it was imposed by anyone. It actually started the first 1-2 weeks of the war. It was extremely not disorganized, but decentralized, where different members of parliament from different political parties would be speaking to particularly international media. And we were actually saying the same things, but
Right.
not because someone told us to say that, but just because the situation was so obvious that, you didn't need someone to tell you what to say. It's just because the situation is, black and white. You understand what is happening and you just translate into the world what is happening here. Later on, there started some mechanism for coordinating between different members of parliament. But so we do have like I'm mostly involved in international work right now, like talking to the media, talking to other MPs, talking to the diplomats. And we do have a chat of different MPs from all political parties. Well, apart from probably the pro-Russian political group, where we actually coordinate and we keep in touch and so on and so forth. There are members of parliament who are more focused on issues like providing humanitarian aid. So those MPs are coordinating among themselves, again, through the party lines. So party lines don't matter that much in terms of resistance to the war. Of course, there are some issues that we disagree upon because we do came here with different ideas of how to govern. But those mainly have to do with local economic issues and how to respond to the economic challenges that are, of course, huge right now, where we do try to come up with the solutions that everyone would agree upon. So I would say that about 90% of legislation that is being passed is passed unanimously. And that is something I've never seen before.
Yeah, it's amazing. So what I hear you saying is the big issue at the moment, obviously the war, you speaking as in one voice, no matter where you are on the political spectrum.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, we have to, and also it's, again, black and white situation. Like there is nothing that you can come up with of saying about Bucha except for explaining that those are the war crimes and we want the world to react. Like nobody has to tell me that this is what I have to be saying just because this is how we all feel.
Yeah. Speaking of the world, now I know you were speaking to other New Zealand media in the last day or so, and the conversation came up about javelins. Now, for people who don't know, javelins are basically a anti-tank missile that you can hold on your shoulder. So like kind of like what I would think a bazooka would be, but anti-tank missiles. And our government has come back saying, well, actually, they've come back saying there's no official request being made, but I don't think there was our government wasn't receptive, it wouldn't seem, to sending you javelins in the initial stages. That's what we're hearing. What does the world need to know to help Ukraine at the moment? What do you need to tell the world? If you had a forum to the world right now, what do you need to say to the world?
Well, I want the world to understand that this threat that we are all dealing with, this war, is not just a war between Russia and Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine and Russia have a very long, complicated history where Russia has been trying to, to kill Ukrainians, to destroy us as a nation for centuries before. So that is part of the reasons why they attacked us. But there was yet another reason why they attacked us, and that is us choosing to be part of the Western civilization. There were actually some people, like including the head of the Russian church, who said that this war is right and that it's right to kill Ukrainians because, and I quote, they don't want to see gay parades in Ukraine.
Right.
That is what they're fighting against. They're fighting against something that we all, I believe, everyone listening to this, myself, believe to be normal in the 21st century. But they're fighting against that because they are, a Nazi state, and they're fighting against anything that they disagree with. So I want you to realize that this is, again, based on very complicated history of relations between Ukraine and Russia, but it's also because Russia is so much against everything that we all hold dear in our hearts, all the values, all the support to democracy and all of that. Ukraine is not perfect in that. We do have our own issues. After all, I'm representing an opposition political party, and I can tell you a lot about the problems with Ukrainian democracy. But we still elect our parliament. We still elect our the presidents. We are still, in that sense, a functioning democracy, and that is what Russia is fighting against. And that is why we are asking the whole world to help us, because if they win here, and I don't believe they will, but they will definitely try to. But you have to realize that they're a threat to the whole Western civilization. And that is why we're asking for weapons, because that is the only way to stop them right now. And the weapons we need are not just anti-tank missiles. We got that. We are using them very well, but also anti-aircraft, fighter jets, long-range missiles to destroy Russian artillery, which I hate particularly because it was with artillery that they were destroying the city of Mariupol, and the artillery that they're using to destroy my native city of Kharkiv right now. We don't have weapons to destroy Russian artillery, and we need that one. So that is what we're asking the world to help us with. And again, we are doing that because this is a threat not just to us, but also to the whole world. And we're asking you to help us fight it on our soil.
Another way that hindsight being 2020, if you had been a member of NATO, that possibly would have been a helping hand now, because the NATO alliance would have been attack on one as an attack on all. What's the best way to explain to those of us who aren't in the know about why Ukraine is not part of NATO? And will this be the straw that as soon as it's over with, Ukraine will be straight in there, straight into NATO, and joining the alliance of the NATO countries?
Well, this is a tough question, because you have to realize that joining NATO depends on the wishes of both sides. First of all, Ukraine needs to want to join. Second, NATO needs to accept Ukraine as a member. And I would say that there were issues on both sides. Right. So for a while, Ukraine was going back and forth in terms of we are more with Europe or we are more with Russia. The last pro-Russian president we had, we kicked him out after the popular revolution in 2013, 2014. After that, all two presidents that we had, they were all saying that European and Euro-Atlantic integration is our choice. It is part of Ukraine's constitution right now. Yeah. So we stated directly in the constitution a couple of years ago that we want to join NATO. That is official, as official as you can get. But there were different approaches among people towards a NATO issue. But I will tell you this, since the beginning of the war, the support of joining NATO has been as high as it has never been. It's in the 70s right now, from 68 to 75. That is, again, very high for Ukraine. And but the other issue is, of course, NATO states, whether they are willing to take Ukraine in. Because we were very close to getting into NATO in 2008. But then I believe because of Russian pressure, the NATO states refused to take us in. And that is one of the issues that now there are huge debates about Angela Merkel's role in that, because she was one of those people who were opposing that. And there is right now like lots of criticism of that history. How she's trying to say that she's trying to to fight against Russians right now, but she was one of the major forces why we didn't join NATO in 2008. Which of course would have saved lives here. Russia wouldn't go into war with Ukraine if we were NATO members. After 2014, the situation got much more complicated because we as a society became much more pro-NATO. But then Russia started war in Donbass, killing 14,000 people in 8 years of war and annexing Crimea. And then NATO started saying like, oh, we don't want to take in a country which is in ongoing military conflict. So this is the issue that NATO is referring to right now. Of course, there are additional issues like whether the Ukrainian army meets the NATO standards and all. I think we're done with that. I think the whole world believes that Ukrainian army is actually one of the strongest in the world right now. So I believe this issue whether we fit in militarily is not an issue right now. But there is an issue on the NATO side saying that if we take you in right now, you are at war. That would automatically mean that we are going into war with Russia.
Right, gotcha.
So that is the discussion right now. What I wish to be the best solution for this is this: we win this war, and we apply to NATO once again. We talk to the NATO leaders, and we ask to take us in. And that would be the final solution. And that is something that Russia is very much afraid of, because if you are following the talks, one of the biggest issues that they demand is Ukraine announcing its neutrality. And neutrality means that we are non-allied state, so we are not joining NATO. And I'm getting these questions from many European countries, particularly like from Austria, Finland, and Sweden, which are officially neutral, which are now reconsidering that, by the way. Like Finland and Sweden are actually thinking about applying to NATO right now.
Wow.
But they are saying like, but maybe you should go for neutrality. And what is important for audience in New Zealand to understand is that we were neutral in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea and started the war in Donbass. So now when Russia is saying like, as long as you are neutral, you are safe, I'm sorry, we all remember the history of 8 years ago, and we're not falling for that trap anymore.
Yeah. For people who don't know, there's just an image of the NATO countries in sort of the blue color, and up here in Finland and those areas, he's saying a neutral, and there's Ukraine just there.
Yeah. Sorry, that's for you to know that air raid alert has been lifted. That's
so the air raid alert that's been lifted. Oh, that's good news. So
yeah,
that's good news.
That means that it was here like for half an hour. Yeah, it started before we started. No.
To someone living on the other side of the world speaking to you, that certainly brings a new reality to the conversation we're having right now.
No.
I guess what I wanted to ask you, maybe it's an impossible question. I've just got two more quick questions. The first one is, what happens next? I mean, what happens next from your perspective? How does this finish? And what's the next step for the Ukraine-Russia war? Well, I say the Russian war with Ukraine. It's like Ukraine didn't have any part to play in this.
No.
What's the next step in this?
Well, sorry, this is the air raid alert being lifted. Not on the, so we got, I'm sorry, just to explain to the audience, we got the apps on our phones, and they work a little bit faster than the sirens on the streets. But now there is a siren on the street saying that it is lifted. So that is how it is functioning. So I'm just hearing the sound. I'm not sure if you hear that as well.
Yeah, no, we did.
Okay. So what is the next? Well, first of all, I believe that the whole world was at first feeling relief that a Russian army has been kicked out of Kyiv region and northern region in general.
Yep.
We didn't feel this feeling of relief because as Ukrainian army was regaining control over those territories, we were also getting more and more pictures from Bucha. So I did, it overwhelmed everything. But right now, we understand that the next major battles will be taking place on the east of Ukraine and a bit on the south. Russia is concentrating its forces in Donbass. We understand that Putin needs to show for some sort of victory for Russian people on the what they call the Victory Day, May 9th. So we believe that they will be fighting like as much as possible on Donbass, so that at least because at first you have to realize they were hoping to take over Kyiv in 3 days. That was their plan. They failed dramatically in it. They didn't realize how strong Ukrainian army is and what level of resistance they will face. But right now they need at least some sort of victory. So they're changing their narrative. I'm hearing Russian propaganda speaking. They are all now saying not that they should, change the regime in Kyiv, as they were saying. Right now they're saying it's all about protection of people of Donbass.
Right.
And that is why apparently they're killing them. That's making no sense because they're basically right now they're destroying Donbass town after town. But I think that's what they will go for. They will try to take control over the rest of Donbass, because they were controlling as of January 2022 about 40% of Donbass. So they will try to go to take control over the rest part of the region and claim that to be their victory for the Victory Day, May 9th. I think that is what will be happening. And what about us? Well, we don't really have much of a choice. We have to fight. And I'm being asked often, like, where do you get the strength and how do you manage to resist? And I think sometimes the answer is as simple as we don't have a choice. Like, we truly don't. We are literally fighting for our lives, for our future, for the lives of our children, for our ability to live in this land. So we don't really have a choice except for fighting back. How long that will take and how successful the Ukrainian army will be, but 50% of that truly depends of resupply of weapons to the army of Ukraine.
Hey, last question, Ina. We have a female prime minister here in New Zealand, and I was wondering if you had an opportunity to speak directly to Jacinda Ardern, from one politician to another, from one female to another, from one mother to another, what would you actually be asking or telling her?
Well, first of all, I'm a great fan. I've been following her career, so she's great. I think the way she's doing her job, being both mother, politician, and she also had a baby while she was in office, right? So she's it's like I try managing having a rather grown-up child and work as a parliamentary, and that is tough on itself. So it's amazing how she's doing that, and I think she's also a very fresh voice to the whole world. Like New Zealand is not often on the political map of the world, but she managed to bring that on, and I think she was doing a great job, frankly speaking. But what I want her to say, woman to woman, in case she's listening, well, first of all, she's great. Second is just please remember that this is about the crime against one child is a crime against all children of the world. And what Russians are doing right now is just incomprehensible. They're monsters for what they're doing, like raping women, killing children. And I believe not a single country should allow for that to be happening anywhere in the world. And we as the whole world should resist that. So I'm just asking you to step in to an extent possible. I understand Ukraine is very distant from New Zealand, but I still believe that we are very similar as all human beings, well, except for Russians. Because we all want our children to be happy. We all want to spend times with our loved ones. And that is the same that we want here in Ukraine. Nothing different from what you want in New Zealand. And that is what we are fighting for. So we are just asking you to help us get to that goal sooner rather than later.
Ina Sovsun, the deputy leader of the Horse Party in Ukraine. Stay safe. Thank you so much for giving us some time today. I very much appreciate you giving us a few minutes. Stay safe. We'll let you go so you can back to your son. And I very much appreciate you giving us some time today.
Sure. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
There you go. George, anything to add?
Well, Ina seems like a very nice person. She is, for those wondering, a member of a sort of centrist liberal party in Ukraine. So a few points I found interesting. It sounded like, she said, that basically she is averse to compromise because basically she wants this war obviously to be over, but wants a sort of Ukrainian victory that isn't going to lead to some sort of semi-frozen conflict where, Ukraine's cut in half and then, there's ceasefires, and then in 10 years when her son is 19, there's another war and this sort of thing. So, really sort of hardline stuff that a full noise victory over the Russians needs to be had now. And so I wonder what that does for diplomacy in the meantime, right? And I mean, her country is being invaded by a country, a neighboring country that is seen as the sort of imperial colonial power historically. And so I understand that, but I wonder what that does sort of you know, in the long term when it comes to diplomatic efforts. The neutrality thing in 2014, I don't know. I'm an outside observer. You know, I don't want to like disagree with her and her sort of situation at the moment. But as an outside observer, the Ukraine was after 2014, after the 2013 Maidan protests and the removal of the pro-Russian leadership there, was obviously aligning itself with NATO, right? It wasn't joining NATO. It was obviously aligning itself with the EU. Now, you know, I understand that Finland and Sweden sort of do have the best of both worlds in terms of like they can sort of be neutral, but also they are, you know, culturally and diplomatically aligned with the West. So that, you know, there is sort of a best of both worlds there, but I don't think Ukraine straddled that after 2014. And it was cool. Like she noted the problems with Ukrainian democracy as well, with corruption. You know, 11 so-called pro-Russian parties were outlawed when this war began, including a party that had about 1/10 of the seats in Parliament was just straight outlawed by the Ministry of Defense. We've seen that, you know, Ukrainians males can't leave the country if they want to. You know, there's obviously human rights issues around that. Exceptional circumstances, but nonetheless, yeah, sort of worrying as an outsider observer that whose life is not currently in danger.
And that's the other thing I was thinking. I mean, we all heard the comment that she's like, you know, the rest of the world who are reasonable people except Russians. You kind of go, well, on one level you go, well, it's not actually the Russian people who are doing this. And even if the Russian people have pretty revolting or repugnant views towards Ukraine at the moment, it's because they're being fed propaganda by their government and being manipulated into that position in general. But on the flip side, to kind of, I mean, the reason I didn't say anything is and I've told you this story, George. I remember having an extended elderly family member who had a husband in World War II be a prisoner of war to a sector of the world. And as a 80-year-old and 90-year-old, you know, several years ago, she still had abhorrent views around that group of people. And you kind of go in that situation, okay, I'll give you a pass. You know, when you hear various like racial slurs and stuff come out, you just let it go because you understand that the dealings with her husband in World War II caused him to come back a different person. He was never the same again, you know. So when someone who's in the middle of a conflict kind of just lambasts all Russians, at this moment you just kind of go, we'll just let that go, because there's obviously reasons for it. I'm sure in 5 years from now, looking back on this, it's like, you know, why did good German people allow the Holocaust to happen? And it's mostly because they either didn't know or they'd been fed lies for so long they were brainwashed. And you know, hopefully that's what will happen with Russian people as well, and they'll see the errors of their ways, meaning they'll have their misconceptions cleared up, and that'll be the way that Russian people move forward and not get lumped into the whole, you know, this is aimed at every Russian, so to speak.
Yeah, that ethnic situation certainly has been exacerbated by not just since 2014, but obviously since the invasion. And you know, there are ethnic Russians who identify as ethnic Russians, but also Ukrainians who live in Ukraine, and you know, it's sort of worrying that is a divide that, as you say, can continue for generations and generations.
Hey, that interview is already up on YouTube because I recorded it last night, so I set it to go live 20 minutes ago. So if you enjoyed it and you want to share it around, it's already on our YouTube channel, which is scrolling along the bottom of the screen as we talk to you. So you're more than welcome to go and grab it. If you caught the end of it, the whole thing's up there already. And yeah, as we always say when we wrap up a show, share our shit, share it around, let other people know what we're doing. I was thinking about maybe what we're doing next week. Maybe we'll talk off air, George, but maybe we'll do a few days trying it at midday if it fits in with timetables. I'm just thinking about the way we can, you know, test the soft launch out and see how it's working and stuff, but we'll see what happens. We'll be in touch. Anyway, as far as right now, you can be concerned that we'll see you at 11 o'clock on Monday. If you follow us on YouTube, if you follow me on Twitter, YouTube's a great place to follow us because you'll get a notification as to when we're going live. And sometimes we have been known to jump in and do a live, like when the Oscars happen, immediately, and you get notified of that. So follow us on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's the best way to stay in touch with us. And I feel like we're done. I think it's the end of 6 weeks of doing this, George, and I need a weekend off, and I'm looking forward to it. So unless there's anything else to add from you, I think we're gonna fuck off to lunch.
Yeah.
We good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right, Sam. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being with us live. Thanks for the comments that have been coming in. Apologies that I didn't get to share all of them, but I'm just acknowledging you guys who have been watching us and have done it. We appreciate your time. Yep, the way you can help us best is to share our stuff around. All of the clips are up on YouTube. Go into the place where most of you are probably watching it right now. Have a look, share them around, find stuff you like. And until we see you Monday morning, 11 a.m., which is the plan today, we'll catch you next time. Hooroo.